I'm Eliza Wood, this is my channel, and let's talk about stays. So it's been about a month since my last update. I was hoping to update a little bit quicker than this, but the stays were taking a lot longer than I was expecting. So here we are, and I still haven't finished the stays. But I can at least update you on all of the things not to do when making stays. Because currently, I still don't have a fitting set. But before I go too far into my stays, I should probably mention, you've probably noticed that I have a skirt on my little mannequin here. This is going to be probably the underskirt. It is a little too big because apparently I did my measurements incorrectly. I did it by percentage rather than by, just adding inches. I think I'll probably talk about that a little bit more later when I'm talking about the stays. But anyway, so it is a little bit big. I'll probably wind up making it a little bit smaller, but I wanted to see how it looked on the mannequin because this skirt is not the pattern that's supposed to go with this set of stays, simply because the stays goes on a dress that has the super wide hips, and we don't want that on our Alice in Wonderland dresses. So I went with a different underskirt than goes with the stays. But it still looks okay-ish. Probably will look better once I have the corset or the stays correctly made. Okay, so back to the stays. This set of stays that I currently have on my mannequin is the third attempt at making this stays. The first attempt, I used the percentage method. Completely incorrect. So I'm working on the mock-ups, and I have made the underskirt, and I'm gonna make the bodice and the train now. And I'm realizing that for some reason when I'm sizing up my pattern pieces, I'm trying to size them up to my own waistline by using percentages. So like if it's 30 inches is what it's supposed to be, like my waistline. That's not actually my waistline, but that's a number. If it's 30 inches and it was supposed to be 15 inches, then I know to size it up times 2. But for some reason, just sizing it up by 2 is not working. It's making it too big. So I'm still kind of experimenting on how the heck I'm supposed to size these patterns up to my size and then make them work. So that's what I'm working on right now. Figure that out. Alright, so I have my pattern book in front of me. You can see the pieces that I'm trying to make are the kind of tannish pieces. I am going through the process of first measuring out what they are on the page in the Patterns of Fashion 5 book, and then I will increase them by 4 because it is a 1 to 4 pattern. So if I have 1 inch on my measurement of the book, I will increase that by 4 inches. However, that's not the right size for me, as I am bigger than the original wearer of this outfit, much so. So then I have to increase it to my own measurements. And the way I did this, as I explained before, is I did a percentage increase. So if I needed to increase from 1 inch to 2 inches, I would multiply that entire thing by 2 inches. So really what I did is I took my width and my length and I multiplied my width by 50%, and I think the length wound up being, I thought, the correct length. So I didn't do anything to the length, but I increased the width by 50%. I also added about a 3/4 inch seam allowance on each of the pieces that I drew. Once I had all of my pattern pieces drawn out on my fabric, not that you can see it very well because apparently I suck at angles and cameras. I'm learning, I'm sorry. I went ahead and used a rotary cutter to cut out all of my pieces. Now for this mock-up, I actually cut out 4 of each piece except for the center front, which was cut on the fold, so it only had 2. The reason for this is because I wanted to have 2 layers of the mock-up so that I could put boning between the 2 layers, because that's how it will be in the final piece. And then it's simply just sewing them all together. Luckily, my seam allowances actually lined up pretty well, and I didn't have too much of crazy wonky seams, so my pieces lined up really well, and I wasn't too concerned about overlap or having too much of one piece and not enough of another piece. It all worked out well enough that it was sewn together, starting with the center front and working my way back to the center back, which was left open for lacing. Once the whole piece is sewn together, I can then get ready for the boning channels. Now the way that I did this is I started with a line at the top where I just sewed a straight line all the way around the top edges where the boning would stop. And then at each of the seams I made I'm actually not really sure how wide they are. I want to say they're a 1/4 inch, but I really just had the foot lined up against the seam and just let it sew the length right next to the seam so that it was right lined up against it.
Alright, so I've made a mock-up of the corset bodice thing that she's going to be wearing. As you can see, the front portion of it at the bust line is kind of gaping out. I think it's probably because this portion is too big. However, the waist portion, this is the side panel right here, and it's kind of sticking in the front. And this right here is the back. This is supposed to be a straight line in the back. So this is supposed to fully close. There's not supposed to be any gaping, and yet here it is, not even really around the shoulder. Now this is my mannequin, which isn't quite the right size for me, but I tried it on myself and I felt the same issues in that case too. I've also tried this on. This is the shoulder sleeve, and it's supposed to sit on, like, kind of fall on the side, and it was a little too tight too, although it's pretty good. In general, it was just a little tight, so I just need to loosen that one up a bit. The rest of it, however, is going to take a little bit more of some changes. So from what I can tell, I did my measurement for my waistline. I might have done it as the underbust instead of where the waist is. So I think I might have gotten my waistline too small, which made the whole waist hip portion too small, because this is supposed to sit at the waist. But surprisingly, the bust is too big. I was expecting the bust to be a lot smaller because this is a straight flat panel, but for some reason it is really big. I'm not sure if maybe it just looks big because I'm thinking maybe this panel is actually supposed to be over here somewhat. I'll have to look more into it because I have no idea.
Well, I'm an idiot. I've realized why my corset bodice piece didn't fit right. Why, for some reason, the bust was massive, whereas the waist and the hips were tiny. I am using the Janet Arnold Patterns of Fashion book, which is a gridded pattern. And I thought, well, that has a waist of 26 and I have a waist of 38 or something. I can't recall off the top of my head. So that is an increase of some percentage. Can't do math right now, don't remember it. So I figured if I have to increase the waist by some percentage, the entire pattern has to be increased by that percentage. Of course, I don't know why I thought that this would work correctly, because I have realized that if you do percentages, that means you're taking a percentage of the whole. So let's say I needed to increase it by 50% and the bust portion was a 10-inch line, that would be increased by 5 inches. Whereas if the waist portion of one pattern piece was a 2-inch line, that would be increased by 1 inch. So I would have a 5-inch increase at the top and a 1-inch increase at the bottom. And that doesn't really work very well. I don't know what I was thinking. I had looked up how to increase the patterns, but there was no real good explanations that I could find where they specifically talked about the increasing the pattern. A lot of times what they say is just count the squares and then just draw it out and then you'll have to alter it, which is all well and good if it's like somewhere near your size, but if it's not somewhere near your size, you need to add some stuff on before you actually put it together. So recently I finally found a tutorial thing that was specifically sizing up a gridded pattern for a plus size female. Now it was only working on skirts, so skirts are much easier to do. You just have to size up the waistline and everything else goes with it. But what they did is they said, okay, this waist is 26 and I need a 38 waist, so I'm gonna add 12 inches. And these 12 inches are gonna be added evenly throughout all of the seams, which makes more sense. Why did I not think of that? So now I'm gonna have to go back and redo my skirt mock-up as well as my bodice mock-up. The bodice mock-up I was gonna redo anyway because it looked really bad. But the skirt mock-up also needed to be redone because it was slightly too big. And I'm not really sure if it's even the correct shapes because apparently I made it too big at the bottom. Ugh, man. So I'm so mad at myself for doing this stupidness. But okay, that's the rant. Let's get back to work.
Okay, let's go through this whole process again, except with the inch method instead of the percentage method. Can't believe I did that still. The one issue that I did, which was a really bad mistake on this particular mock-up, is I actually only did one layer on this mock-up rather than the two that I had done on the previous one. This isn't a massive deal because it is a mock-up, but it makes the whole thing weaker, and so in a moment you'll see that there's actually some ripping in the back where the lacing is, and also it's not quite as sturdy in the actual piece, and it is more malleable than it really should be.
Alright, so attempt number 2, and we've still got some gaping in the back, which is a problem because this is my bodice, so it needs to be fully closed in the back. The front is looking a little bit better. I have it pulled pretty tight right now, so it's kind of doing this wrinkling, but that should go away when I have all of the bones in. Right now I just have the very minimum just bones in the seams, but I'm definitely gonna have to put more bones in. Before I do that though, I wanted to check and see how it was gonna fit on my mannequin and myself. So we still gotta add some extra width to my back. Probably, let's see. See if I can do this one-handed. 6 inches about, maybe a little bit less than that because my mannequin is a little bit bigger than me. So probably add about 6 inches to the back. And then also I am not liking this sleeve here. As you can see, it's pulling really taut with the rest of the dress, the rest of the bodice. And that means I can't fit an arm in that armhole. So I'm gonna have to figure out a different method of trying to get this to work. It's not really a huge deal to get this arm to work anyway, because both the white queen and the red queen wouldn't use this. The red queen actually has a shoulder strap, and the white queen has a kind of poofy strap that doesn't even look like it attaches to the bodice. But I wanted to see if I could get the sleeve to work so I could work off of it to get the rest of the bodice to work. But I think it's just best probably to forgo the sleeve that they've trying to give me and just make a new one after I get the actual bodice to work. But in total, I'm happy with it. This is probably a good size for my front. That would be where the panel is for the front. But it might be a little bit bigger depending on where exactly I decide to add my excess inches to. Again, I haven't quite decided where I want all of these portions to be. So, time to go back to the drawing board and hopefully make a better mock-up than this that actually has more structure.
And finally, we have mock-up number 3. Now with this one, I think I was a little bit more confident with how it was looking. Before I even tried it on, I decided that I was going to go ahead and do a full-on mock-up with all of the boning channels and everything. So what I'm doing right now is I am sewing in each of the boning channels. Now this whole bodice is filled with boning channels. So what I did is I lined up the foot with the sewing line next to it and just followed the line, making sure not to overlap and close off any of my channels. Once all of the sewing channels were sewn, I then cut up what I went ahead and used, because there's so many boning channels, is some really long zip ties, industrial strength zip ties. I think they were 18 inches and you can get them from Walmart. And I just cut a whole bunch of those up and slid them into each of the boning channels. And this gave me a much stiffer mock-up that I could actually see on a person how it would actually look once it was finished with its structure.
Alright, here we have attempt number 3. The front actually looks kind of good. There's no more of that wrinkling. However, you will notice that it is much looser. The reason for that is because I can't pull it as tight when it is on my mannequin with all these bones. The shape, though, is really good. I like the shape and I like how the bones are sitting. I'm missing a couple bones in the center front just because I didn't bother putting them in. However, after putting the bones in and adding the 6 inches that I needed to add, I still have a massive gap in the back. Whoop! Back. Now, once again, my mannequin is too big for me, so this gap isn't exactly accurate. It actually looks bigger now than it did before, but again, I can't lace it as tight because of the bones. So now I have these back pieces actually completely close on me at the top, but not down here at the waist. I still have this massive gap down here. even though I added the inches that was supposed to get me to a fully closed. And as you can see on this one, I still have this kind of crooked line. It's supposed to sit straight down my center back rather than this outward curve. That's not gonna work. It's gonna pull weird and you're gonna have this gap in the middle of your back, which you wouldn't want on a ball gown. And this is my bodice, so that's not okay. So it's back to the drawing board again. So both my second and third attempts were using the same method. My mannequin is a little bit bigger than me, so in actuality, this corset closes completely at the top, but it's actually too big on the bust line, but it's much too small on the waist and hip line. And I'm not really sure where the issue is coming in. It could just be that the person who was originally wearing this particular set of stays had already been used to wearing stays and therefore had a smaller waist. But it's just not fitting currently. I did go through the process of going ahead and putting all of my bones in just to see how it would fit. And again, it seems to look, it looks nice. Like it looks exactly like it's supposed to look in the pattern. However, it doesn't fit. It's too small, and no matter how many inches I add on, I am not getting the closure that I need in the waist. I can continue to add on to the waist, and it's just not gonna work out for me. I think the reason for that is probably because of this triangular piece right here. Even adding however many inches, this comes down to a point. So you're just not getting really anything there. At least that's how I think geometry works. All I'm really doing is making this piece longer and longer and longer, and it's dipping too far into the stomach line. The other issue I think that I'm having is the pattern pieces have these little tabs at the bottom of them, which I think this overskirt was generally sewn onto the stays, if I'm understanding correctly, on this kind of dress anyway, but they had the tabs, and I think that made it so it had a little bit of a more streamline instead of just your hips kind of popping out at this rather stiff line. They had the little tabs to make it so that your pattern was, your body shape was a little bit smoother, if that makes any sense whatsoever. So what my plans are is to remake the corset again, but this time I want to use the arc method. The arc method is explained in the Patterns of Fashion 5, but it was kind of confusing and I didn't quite understand it. I really wanted to attempt it originally, but I couldn't quite understand it and I couldn't quite figure it out. However, since then, there has been a YouTuber, I can't quite remember her name off the top of my head, but I will definitely put a link in it in the description, who is making a 3-part series about the arc method and how to use it. So I'm gonna try to follow along with her YouTube to try to figure out how to do the arc method and remake the stays and hopefully actually get them to fit this time, because these mock-ups are taking much longer than I had hoped and I'm kind of running out of time. So that's what I got for now. Hopefully I'll be able to get these stays mock-up done pretty quickly, and I can do the overskirt mock-up and then move on to the actual dress. I need to start ordering fabric real soon. So if you guys are interested in watching more, go ahead and subscribe. If you have any comments, critiques, or constructive criticisms, or even just ways that I could do things better, please let me know in the comments below. Thank y'all for watching. Bye!